Welcome to Introduction to Artifact Identification. The goal of this training is for you to be able to make an educated determination that objects are or are not potential artifacts. I'm going to cover common terminology, combinations of artifacts, prehistoric artifacts, and historic artifacts. So first, what is an archaeological site? A site is a place where human activity occurred and material remains were deposited. For example, the BLM decided that it's any location containing 2 or more artifacts or features that are spaced no more than 30 meters apart. So we have to put a boundary on an archaeological site, and they put a boundary of 30 meters. Sites contain features sometimes, and a feature is a type of material remain that cannot be removed from a site. For example, roasting pits, fire hearths, or in this picture, a rock shelter. And structures, which are buildings or other constructed resources, such as bridges, corrals, and kilns, or this tipped-over outhouse. Artifacts are any portable object that shows evidence of human manufacture, modification, or use. So prehistoric sites are those which date to before about the 1820s with the introduction of writing into the area. Common prehistoric site types and their features are rock shelters, wickiups, where you have the brush structure. Most of the times all you find are the timbers and not the brush because that's all decomposed over time, or you find rock rings. Rock writing, both pictographs, where the images are painted on the surface, and petroglyphs, where the rock surface has been removed by pecking away. And roasting pits, which are underground ovens that cook oftentimes agave and other plant material. And then once the rock has been heated by the fire, it only holds that heat once, so it's shoveled back out. So you end up with donut-shaped impressions with fire-cracked rock. Artifacts include stone tools, ceramics, and other items. We're going to talk about stone tools by covering the common types, how they're made, and the different characteristics. There are 6 main categories of stone tools. You have cores, flakes, bifaces, hammerstones, choppers, manos, and metates. So, core, flakes, and bifaces. So stone tools that are manufactured through what we call flint knapping. It's where you take a microcrystalline silicate or natural rock glass, something that has few imperfections and is brittle enough to be broken easily, and you make tools from it. So examples of this type of stone are obsidian, basalt, chert, chalcedony, flint, and jasper. Now these stones are easier to shape, but they also hold a sharp edge. Now core is the material, that stone material that they start with to start flint knapping and make their tools. And as you can see on the image to the right, they're going to hit the flat part of the stone at the top and break off a flake. So there's a platform, which is the flat top, and then the flake, which is what gets removed from the core. Flint knapping causes a lot of debris and flakes of stone to fall in and around the area where flint knapping is occurring. And sometimes that's all you're going to find are the flakes from stone tool manufacturing. The photo on the left, you can kind of see where there is deliberate removal of rock surface. And then the drawing on the right shows that you end up with a lot of these lines and rippling and shapes based on hitting and molding the stone that is being worked. So the example on the left, the photo, you can easily see where a stone hit the bottom of that rock and then sent a ripple through the stone. This is where it's predicting the waves of the ripple to pop off the flake. And a lot of times you can see that pretty easily in obsidian, which is the dark black volcanic rock. but you can find it in other materials as well. Okay, so once the person who's making the stone tool has a rough outline of the object that they're making, their flakes that they break off become smaller. So here we have some examples of those types of flakes, including in the image on the bottom left, where they've made tools in this area from a lot of different material, and they've left flakes of that tool stone behind. And you can see quite easily in these 6 locations where that has fallen. Okay. Now that's kind of hard to see these things on the ground. Usually tool stone is a different color from the surrounding rock, but if you can take a look here and take a minute, see if you see any of those flakes or a core. And you can see 2. And then in this image, there's at least 4. There may be more. Now, when you get down to the finer detailed work of flint knapping to create the edge and the shape that you'd like, you get even smaller flakes. So these are some examples of these small, tiny flakes. But in the process of creating stone tools, sometimes flakes will come off that aren't meeting the requirements of making whatever tool is intended, or maybe the flake itself is the intended tool. So these are expedient knives and blades that can be used for a variety of resource processing. This example here, you can see there's a smooth body on the flake, and then the outsides have been worked, so it's been utilized. Bifaces are stone tools that have flaking on both sides of the edge. So the stone tool here on the right has marks on one side and the other. And bifaces serve a multitude of purposes. They're used as cutting and slicing tools, and there's a million different types, but these are the top 5. There's projectile points, or arrowheads, denticulates, choppers, drills, and scrapers, and I'll show examples of each. So here's a different variety of projectile points. Each one of them has a base. That's the best indicator that it's a projectile point. Denticulates kind of have a tooth-like structure to them. Choppers are usually used in 1 or 2 hands. A drill, which can be used as like a punch to work through leather. A scraper. And then there's just other types of stone tools. They don't all have to have a name or fall into a specific category to be recognizable. We just may not know what their intended purpose was. Then there's also hammer stones. They're heavier chunks of tool stone with coarser material that could hold up to the punishment and heavy use of hammering. Sometimes there's a worked edge. For example, this one just has the 2 large pieces that are removed. And they could be used to chop wood or bone, any variety of activities. Monos are different. I mean, they're both made out of strong materials and can hold up to heavy use, but a mono is smooth on at least one side. And it's used with a metate or grinding slick to process and grind material. Here's a metate and a mortar. These are portable, and there's a smooth spot on both where the grinding occurred. And the mono can be used with a metate, and usually you have a pestle, which is used with a mortar, or you would turn that mono on its side and use it to hammer down. Not all grinding surfaces are portable, so we have what are called grinding slicks, which is a smooth surface and a stone that can't be moved, or a mortar that has been chipped away into a stone. And then there's this other thing called cupules, which are also chipped away divots in stone. There are a lot of other types of stone tools. and objects that you may find at an archaeological site. The ones I just covered are the most common, but you can also find stone tools that are shaft straighteners, grooved axe heads, beads, incised stones. So you've been provided an artifact guide. In that artifact guide, there are notes about what I've just talked about, along with images. So I'd like you to use your artifact guide, plus what you just learned, to make an educated guess on the next images. The question here is this an artifact or just a rock? The material is chert, has some sharp edges, and it has a striking platform. So this is a large flake from a core, and the reason I say it's from a core is you can see on the bottom image that top surface is rough, and that's the original part of the core that's the outside part of the rock. Okay, here's another example. All right, I think this is just a rock. There's no sharp lines. It's not shaped concave. I don't see a striking platform, and it doesn't look like the type of stone that is uniform and would be good for making a stone tool out of. Okay. This is obsidian, and I can see a striking platform. It's a little bulb of percussion. That's where that energy went through. And this is actually a flake. Next example. Don't know what the material is, but it's smooth when you touch it. And there are arises, or raised sharp lines across the surface. It's a flake. The rock has an even thickness, but there's no sharp lines or arises. It's just a rock. The material is obsidian, has a base. It's worked on both sides. That makes it a projectile point. It's not smooth. It's just a rock. It's a flake. 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 So ceramics are the other type of prehistoric material that has been able to be preserved through time. And we're going to cover some of the common characteristics. So first of all, ceramics are a mix of clay and temper. And temper is a coarse material that's been added to the clay to add strength and to keep it from shrinking too much when it's firing. So when you take a piece of stone or ceramic and you're trying to tell what it is, if you hold it up and look at the side of it, you'll be able to see temper if it's a ceramic, and those are those little bits. The other thing you might find when you pick it up and turn it sideways is its shape. Since this is part of a vessel, it's concave. And these items were made by hand, so you may see smoothing lines from them using something to scrape the inside or even their fingers. And they come in decorated ware or corrugated ware with like a texture on the outside, or plain. When you find ceramics on the ground, you rarely find a large piece. A lot of the large pieces and full pots have already been collected. So usually what you find are smaller, what we call sherds, and they are oftentimes the color of the ground. This one is not, so let's see if you can count how many pieces of ceramic you can see. Okay, there's at least 4 pieces in that picture. This is more likely what you're going to encounter. See if you can pick out some pieces. Okay, there's at least 5 there in the center, and there's some off to the side as well. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is take out your prehistoric ceramics card in your artifact guide. And we're going to go over a few more images, and I'd like you to make an educated guess. Okay. The texture is rough on both sides of this. It's a rock. The texture is smooth on both sides of this one. It's a ceramic. This one has a lip or a rim. It's a ceramic. There's no temper in this one, so no little pieces when I look at it from the side, and the thickness isn't uniform. So this is just a rock. This one's a little difficult. It's got maybe some temper, and the surface is smooth on both sides. It's actually a ceramic. This one I can kind of tell right away because it's textured on one side and smooth on the other. So that's a ceramic. This one's uniform in thickness, but it's rough on both sides. And I don't see any temper, so it's just a rock. Some other types of prehistoric artifacts that you may come across are bone, shell, wood and fibers, maybe even woven objects like sandals and blankets or cloth, and basketry. We just don't find these very often unless it's inside of a rock shelter or somewhere where it has been out of the elements. Now, historic sites occurred from the 1820s to 50 years ago, so that end date is always changing. We find town sites, whether they are built from wood and metal or stone, mining areas with old cars and mills, ranches, old corrals and watering tanks, old railways and old roads, civilian conservation corps projects, the trash scatters that people left behind. So the artifacts that we usually use to identify if people have been in a location are cans, glass, and other trash. And this again is from the 1820s to about 50 years ago. So cans, what you usually find are rusted old tin cans. This is 2 examples. And what we look for in these cans is we look for the shape, how it's sealed, the method they used for opening it, and if there's a maker's mark. So these cans are milk cans, condensed milk cans. As you can see in the one on the left, there's a lead seal. It's called a hole in top, and it was common from the 1900s to the 1920s. In the center, you can see that the can top and bottom were stamped around, and then we have the way they opened it was with a knife, so you know that it had liquid contents. There's also the key wind, which started in 1866, and we still make them today. And the hinge lids, these are primarily used for tobacco tins. And cone top beer cans, those stopped in the 1960s, so you know for sure if you come across a cone top can that it's going to be a historic object. Right? And then for a while we opened our cans with church keys, so starting in 1935. And then we came up with the pull tab in 1962, and it went through a lot of different variations. So this is an example of how cans have changed over time. Coca-Cola is pretty recognizable. Any Coke can, or can for that matter, over 50 years old is historic. If it's over 100 years old, it's archaeological. And what this means is that the 1970s is becoming historic. So this Coke can on the bottom, the all aluminum can, is historic. So now we can't rely on if it's a rusty tin can, it's historic, and anything aluminum isn't. All aluminum cans are now becoming historic. So here's a little can dating exercise. If you take out a piece of paper and a pen, take a few minutes to put these in order from the oldest to the most recent. Okay, here are the cans with their corresponding dates. We don't get cans with pretty labels on them very often in the field, if at all. So usually what you come across are cans that are in this condition. Archaeologists can take what little clues that we can find of the label, the way it was opened, the way the can was manufactured, and find out which cans they were. So this is a 1949 Coors can and a 1958 A1 Pilsner. This is a 1967 Coors can. Glass is also looked at to give us dates and times for when people were occupying an area. Usually you don't find this much glass in one place, but even though there aren't full bottles here, we can still find clues and date ranges. One of the main things we look at are maker's marks on glass. For example, the Owens, Illinois brand would put a lot of information into their maker's marks. This, for example, the 20 on the left-hand side of the symbol tells us that it was manufactured in Brackenridge, Pennsylvania, which closed in 1937. So we know that this glass was made before or in 1937. We look at the color. This Puritas bottle has a purple tint to it. It was originally a clear bottle, and over time the manganese changed colors within the glass, so it got a purple hue. And then the green bottle on the right was only started being manufactured in 1860. Okay. Other clues is the location. If your bottle has lichen or cryptobiotic soil growing out of it, that helps. And also the form. Is that a usual form that you would see for a bottle today? And the overall appearance, you can start by the color. For example, this one was uncommon after the 1880s, so that gives us an idea that it's old. That there was no seam, but that was between the 1880s and 1915. It had a push-up base. The lip's not uniform. And the bore or orifice is not uniform. So this points to the fact that this is a historic glass bottle. With more information, we could find the actual date. And then we look at appearance. For this glass, it's purple, but it's got that tint that has changed over time. It's got imperfections in it. You can see in the right photograph at the top that it had a bubble. And this one, we have a maker's mark, which helps us really narrow things down. And it was a Heinz ketchup bottle that was produced between 1876 and 1888. And like I said, with that glass scatter, sometimes all you have is the base. So we've got a color, it's clear, but it's starting to look opalescent. It gets a sheen to it as it decomposes. But it has the maker's mark, and that maker's mark can give us the date of 1915. So here's an example of a glass bottle as you'd find it at a site. Again, they're not in the greatest of condition, So the question is, using your card and the clues we just went over, do you think that this is 50 years old or older? It looks as though the clear glass has gone to an aqua. It doesn't really resemble a modern bottle type. Has some uneven thickness. So the question is it historic or not? And it is historic. Some other types of historic artifacts you come across are ceramics. And again, you're going to look at the color, the design, any kind of logo. Nails, if they're hand forged or not. Barbed wire came through different versions at different times. Plastics are now historic. For example, that Snoopy is from the 1930s. So I hope with this information that we've covered in this presentation, you'll be able to make an educated decision as to whether or not an object is an artifact. You know, each year more things become historic and archaeological, and you can help with protecting and preserving cultural resources. Thank you.